Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to review a few housekeeping items with you, which you should all know at this point. We've been doing this platform for our webinars for several years now, but just a few friendly reminders. If you get disconnected during this call for any reason, you need to log back in immediately, and please send us an email just letting us know you got disconnected. This will help us connect the dots at the end and make sure that you receive your credit. If you are using the GoToWebinar app on your iPhone, please also let us know. Sometimes it does not capture the information as well as it should, and just say, hey, I used it. Any kind of, if you could do a screenshot even, that would be fabulous, so we have backup information in case we need it. At the time of registration, when you got onto this webinar, you were asked to provide us with the names of all of those sitting in with you watching this webinar. Please let us know via email if you forgot someone or someone came in just now and you already got on. Just let us know. Following the webinar, we ask that you give us about 5 to 7 business days to get your portal reflective of this CEU. As you know, if you have questions during the webinar, and we always encourage questions, type them into the question box on the right-hand side. And as you remember from the last couple webinars we've done, we ask you to write a number down in case we need to ask. And this opening number is 54. Mark that down so you can say, I was on the webinar, I heard you say that number, and that number is 54. Okay, at this time, I would like to welcome our newly elected president, Mike Gorton, for a few comments.
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to touch base, jump on here at the beginning of the CEU just to go over some things that the board is working on. We just came out of our planning sessions up in Cooperstown. You can take a look at the newsletter that just came out yesterday. There's important pieces in Mike Lunati's article that discusses some of the changes that we're doing to our legislative process and how we rank our priorities. There's also an important piece in my report where we're going to be virtually going around the state to the various regions to meet with our members in those regions virtually. They're going to be taking place over the course of the month of October. We're looking to increase communication, discuss the new legislative process that you can read about in the newsletter. We want to gather some input from our members on concerns in their regions, have dialogue on issues affecting funeral service locally. And we're looking really for ways that we, the board, can collaborate with our members and include our regional directors so that we can work together and improve funeral service in New York State. Following the October virtual town halls, we are going to be looking to bring back the local leader summit. It's been in hiatus for a couple of years, but come springtime, we're going to be bringing that back. You'll find out more information later on, but do keep your eye out for an important email that's going to come later this week about those virtual summits in October. In November, your officers are going to be going to Connecticut for the 5-state partnership meetings. We'll have more information about that in future issues. The info that we do obtain from the town halls are going to be shared with the board when we do meet again in December. And just a reminder, this webinar and all webinars that the association puts out, they're valuable and free member benefit. I know we're a couple of months away from renewal, but keep that in mind as you do consider to join New York State Funeral Directors Association again. The value that we provide, by presenting this webinar and all webinars basically at no cost for our members. So again, I want to thank everybody for your support. The board's working hard to do things for New York State and for the membership, and I'll see you on the next one. Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Mike. At this time, I'd like to welcome our presenter, Dr. Chris Fulkerson. Dr. Fulkerson is the founder of Coping for Kids, which started in 2007, and co-founder of the not-profit Coping for Life in 2016 after spending 13 years with a grief center. She has extensive training in grief, trauma, youth mental needs, suicide prevention, and rural mental health. She was honored with a 2011 NASW Social Worker of the Year Award, a 2016 YMCA Woman of Distinction Award, and the 2021 Horace Mann Reaching Out and Building Bridges Award by the Illinois Principals Association for her innovative mobile social work programs in rural schools. She resides in Southern Illinois with her 9 children and her husband. Welcome, Dr. Fulkerson.
Just to clarify, tell me about timing. Do I have an hour to talk and then a half an hour for questions? Is it an hour total? I forgot to ask this earlier, I apologize.
Sure, no problem. So we do have an hour webinar, and the questions can be at the end. So you can speak for an hour and then we can do Q&A, or a little less than an hour and we can include the Q&A in the hour CEU.
Okay, all right. Let's wait till the end. If you have a question that comes in through the chat though, by all means, if you're like, oh, she is talking about this right now, feel free to interject. That would not mess me up at all, I promise. Okay, thank you for letting me get clarity. As Kelly said, my name is Dr. Chris. I am in Southern Illinois, so I'm just a little bit away from you all. But I think grief is universal. I don't think grief is universal. I know grief is universal. And so what we're going to talk about today was, it was never supposed to end this way, guiding families after a stigmatized loss. I've been in the field 20 years now. I don't know how that happened. I blinked and suddenly I can say things like I've been in the field for 20 years. I don't know everything and I don't know all things. And I refuse to say that I've seen it all, because every time I do, something new pops up. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about might be familiar to you. Some might not. Some you might just start thinking about it in a different way. Regardless, I'm really glad that you're here. What we're going to talk about today, and do I need to move this? I don't know if you guys can, if that's blocking or not. But
no, they can't see that box, so okay, you're good.
Thank you. I was just like, oh, there's a box there. I didn't know if I was blocking. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. Because when as a grief professional, as a trauma professional, I actually specialize in working with children and adolescents and their families. One of the things that I preach and I practice is no surprises. I don't like surprises. I don't even really like them for my birthday. So if you got me a birthday present, you want to let me know what it is ahead of time, I'm okay with this. But not a huge fan of surprises. So I will predict as we go along, and I will encourage you to do the same with grieving families. They've already had a huge surprise, a very unpleasant surprise. And so one of the little gifts that we can give them is to predict what's coming. I'm going to do the same thing for you with this presentation. So first, we're going to build a foundation around what is stigma and what is grief, so that we're all on the same baseline. We're going to shift from that into the most helpful ways to respond in the immediate to a stigmatized death. And then we're going to expand that into a discussion of some longer term strategies and ways that you all can provide support to families who've had a death. And at the end, we'll do a little recap, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So I just was talking to Kelly and Mike, and I said, if this was in person, we would be playing games, because I am someone who learns better by doing. And so I'm always challenged when I get to present via Zoom or in this case, GoTo webinar, because I really want to see you all, I want to engage with you all, I want to do activities, and it just doesn't work. And so I'm going to invite you to do an activity with me right now. It is I promise it is a very low ask. This is not something that's going to take you completely outside your comfort zone. It's a very low ask. You don't even have to stand up. You can stay seated or however you're currently situated. And I do encourage you to do it, though. This might be the most important thing that you get out of our conversation today? I hope not, but it might be. And so all I'm going to ask you to do, encourage you to do, is just cross your arms. We probably do this multiple times a day, but everybody has done this before. We all know how to cross our arms. And so just cross your arms as you normally would. And it feels kind of right, feels normal. Probably have not thought about it ever until this conversation. But what I'm now going to ask you to do is to reverse how your arms are crossed. So whatever arm is on top, I want you to put it underneath. And what other arm is underneath, I want you to put it on top. So I actually have to think about how to do this. And so we're going to do that. And I want you to hold that for just a second. So things to think about. Were you like me? Did you have to like pause and think about it? Or in fact, I had to kind of talk myself through it and actually look at what I was doing. Does it feel kind of wrong? Are you uncomfortable right now? I am very uncomfortable with my arms crossed like this. I mean, did you, maybe you're not like me. Did you get it to work either by instinct or by luck? Because sometimes that happens too. Like maybe you didn't have to think about it. Not everyone is the same. So here's why we did that. You can uncross your arms now. When I first asked you to cross your arms, I imagine many of you just did it automatically. You just kind of comfortably fell into it. You might have been wondering what in the world I'm asking you to do, and maybe questioning if this is actually the best use of your time. I promise you it is. But those might have been thoughts that were going through your head. But when we changed it up, I imagine the majority of us did have to think about it and did feel quite uncomfortable, actually. Working with stigmatized grief, working with stigmatized losses is very much the same. We can understand it and talk about it at a theoretical level and have a lot of comfort with that. Like, oh yeah, I know what a stigmatized loss is. Oh, I know what grief is. But when we really get into it, some of us are going to have to really pause and think about what we're doing. We're going to have to be very intentional with what we do when a family comes in and we're serving them and they have this stigmatized loss. Some of us are going to feel like, oh, like everything I'm doing is wrong. I'm not doing this. This does not feel good to me. I venture to guess that the vast majority of us will be uncomfortable, even if we do think we're doing it right. And there might be a few of us who are just going to do a good job, either by instincts or by luck. Today is all about leveraging that luck and building those instincts. So gaining some comfort, or at least familiarity with something that is likely to feel uncomfortable, a stigmatized loss. All right, well, thanks for playing my not quite a game. Now we're going to get into that building the foundation. And so if you do a quick Google search of what is stigma, it's going to give you a definition similar to something like a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. So a mark of disgrace, something that is socially disapproved. And then if you look at grief, now, when I Googled it, this was one of the definitions: deep sorrow, especially caused by someone's death. I will tell you that in working with children and families for all of these years, I usually define grief as that sad, mad, bad feeling you get when someone dies, mostly because I don't know that grief is definable. Not really. I just don't. I think it is such a unique experience, a personal experience, and there's so many different factors that go into it that I have shied away from defining it beyond like, it's really like just you're sad, you're mad, you just feel all these feelings. It doesn't feel good after someone dies. So, you know, obviously that doesn't look nearly as pretty on a slide as the one that I put up there. But again, I want us to all have the same baseline. When we put those two together, we're talking about stigmatized grief. And that is grief that is complicated by a socially taboo cause of death. So again, like a socially disapproved kind of death. And so we're going to get into what those are. Here are some that are pretty well accepted as stigmatized death. Sometimes when we talk about this, we talk about disenfranchised grief and stigmatized loss. So some of those are interchangeable. Some of it is a little different. I think we've moved a bit away from talking about disenfranchised grief and moved into stigmatized loss. But here's the list that I compiled. And so we're talking about deaths by suicide, perinatal losses, deaths involving a person who is LGBTQ plus, a murder, a homicide there, COVID-19. Particularly if you're from a rural community, COVID-19 was very much a taboo kind of death. Anything involving criminal activity, intimate partner violence. We used to be called domestic violence. That has really changed into more of the phrase intimate partner violence. Smoking or drug use related, obviously we're talking about overdoses there. And then anything having to do with mental health. Those are kind of the big ones. I would say over the course of my career, other things that I've seen is a death that happened in the course of having an affair. Deaths that happen. Think about kids taking risky behaviors. Sometimes those are looked at as socially taboo, or families don't get the sympathy and empathy and compassion that we would want them to get because there's some judgment there. So for example, earlier this year in our community, I live very rural, and they had alternative vehicle day at school. And so kids drive, seriously, they drive tractors to school, they drive golf carts and four-wheelers and side-by-side all-terrain vehicles. After school that day, kids were on their way home. Some of them were racing in their side-by-sides. There was an accident and a kiddo was unfortunately killed in that accident. The family reported lots and lots of judgment. With the uptick in social media, that judgment was very public. And so, there was backlash with the school, there was backlash with the parents. And so that would be an example of like kids taking unnecessary risks. I say kids, it's adults too, but the example that I had was kids taking doing these risky behaviors, and it resulted in a death. I also think about, deaths that are not socially disapproved. I don't want to say socially approved. That feels kind of weird to me. But deaths that are not taboo. I'm a widow. My husband died at the age of 41. And I will tell you that I stopped telling people that he died from lung cancer. I now say he died from adenocarcinoma because nobody knows what that is. But if I say my husband was 41, he died of lung cancer, the very first question everyone asks me is, did he smoke? Did he smoke? Did he smoke? As though that would make it okay. And so just to, I have the option of avoiding that. I can say adenocarcinoma and nobody knows what that is. And we avoid that awkward, judgy conversation about whether or not he, in some way, deserved to die, contributed to his own death. Because as a society, we tend to say, oh, well, that's too bad. And with that very judgy tone. And so stigmatized losses then carry this sense of shame, this sense of maybe anger, and certainly a very real isolation. And so, it's really important, I think, to know too that there are two different ways that happens. One is public, right? One is that public stigma. I talked about social media and the role that it played with the kiddo who died in the side-by-side accident. Social media, very public. If the parents hadn't let them take it, if the school hadn't had that day, and so on and so forth. So lots of judgment there. But there's also another version of it, and that is internalized stigma. So I think about, I'm going to go back to COVID-19 in rural communities. So initially, during the pandemic, deaths in urban areas were much, much higher than deaths in rural areas. And as the pandemic continued, that actually flip-flopped, and we saw this huge increase. And in fact, per capita, more people in rural areas died of COVID-19 than in urban areas. However, our rural areas tend to be very politically conservative, and for whatever reason, COVID-19 became a divisive kind of conversation, and so people who had someone die of COVID were often met with ridicule and not support, because nobody wanted to hear it. They didn't believe that they died of COVID-19, and it became more of a political conversation than a grief conversation, which made it very hard for people. And so what we see with this internalized stigma is that people self-isolate. So it's not that nobody will talk to them, it's that they are not talking to anybody else. Same thing with our LGBTQ plus folks. Lots of people don't want to tell anybody that their child was LGBTQ plus, and so, or their partner, well, not their partner, that wouldn't work, but they don't want a child or sibling, sorry, or parent, and so they may not talk about the death at all, or a suicide loss. If someone's partner died by suicide, people may struggle with their own beliefs about suicide and also may not want to share that information. So again, we're talking about all of these very, very stigmatized deaths. When we talk about them, I really wanted to get us again on that same page. How many people are we talking about? We're talking about a lot. For the most part, except for the one that is marked with UN, because that's a global number. The rest of these are all based on CDC data, and they are all from the year 2023. So in 2023, we had 49,000 people who died by suicide in the United States. There have been 800,000 who have died by suicide since the year 2000. So at this point in time, the suicide rate is about 14 per 100,000. Living in rural communities, again, that is where I practice, and that is where my research has focused for the last 10 years. Living in a rural community doubles your risk of dying by suicide. There is a rural mortality penalty, and one of those is very much suicide related. And then, you know, over half of gun deaths are involved in, are over half of suicides are gun deaths. And again, that just increases that taboo, that socially unacceptable conversation, because gun use is very political at this point in time. That makes it really, really hard for families to openly grieve this kind of a death. In 2023, 23,000 people in the United States died by homicide. Interestingly, very frighteningly, 36% of female homicide victims actually died due to intimate partner violence. So men are more likely to die by homicide, but if a female does, it is most likely by her significant other. Globally, 51,000 females have died by intimate partner violence, and that was just in 2023. A couple of other really interesting numbers for you guys to see. 105,000 Americans died by drug overdose in 2023. And this is what really strikes me. In 2003, we were losing people to drug overdose deaths. It was like 9 per 100,000, so 9 people per capita, so per 100,000. That was in 2003. 20 years later, and it's been really consistent since then, including the latest year, it is over 30 people per capita. So we went from 9 in 2003 to 30 just 20 years later. So definitely seeing that huge increase, and very much a stigmatized loss. Our babies, we've got 21,000 babies who are stillborn every year, so they're born dead. And again, that is another one that has become more political, but also is one that we as a society don't like to talk about. And so we we don't. We turn away from families who have had that. And then I just put special populations up there, again, just because there are a few others that have some really important numbers for us to consider. So people who identify as LGBTQ plus are actually at a 2.5 times higher rate of suicide risk. So they are 2.5 times more likely to die by suicide than the average hetero person. 20% of LGBTQ plus folks have attempted suicide in the last few years. And then just from a mental health perspective, people with major mental health diagnoses, particularly schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, they have a 40% higher risk of developing cardiovascular and metabolic diseases than the general population. People with serious mental illnesses are twice as likely to develop those conditions, and those conditions, of course, are related to some of our top causes of death in the United States. And the average delay from the onset of symptoms of major mental health to diagnosis is 11 years. So all of these are just to show you that stigmatized deaths are happening. They're happening everywhere. They're happening in large numbers. Some of them, these numbers are really going up. And so again, I'm really excited that you're here with us today having this conversation. Now that we've done all that, and I had you cross your arms and do the things, and now that you're aware and you know what stigma is, and you know what grief is, and we're on the same page, and you've seen all of these very, very, startling statistics, that's great, Chris, but now what, right? Lots of times my work kids will be like, okay, Dr. Chris, but I don't know what that means. So now we're going to get into like, okay, what does that mean? And I'm going to tell you that something that you guys probably already know is you are the first responders in the grief world. You oftentimes are the very first grief-informed person that people meet after they've experienced a major loss. And so I use first responders very purposely because what we need to do in this moment very much is treat people just like we would someone in a crisis response situation, a first responder situation, which means we need to meet their basic needs first. So what do they need right now in this moment as they are coming into you? Many people find out about a stigmatized loss in a very sterile, business-like, or abrupt, cold kind of way. I think about police officers who have to tell somebody that their significant other died in a homicide or died by suicide or overdosed. I think about doctors having to tell parents that their baby has died. I think about, sometimes LGBTQ plus folks, if they're in a relationship, one partner may not be present because of a family situation. It may not be even known that the person who died is LGBTQ. It may not be known that they have a partner. And so they may find out via social media or the newspaper. It seems very bizarre, but truly, stigmatized deaths oftentimes are told to people in a very not compassionate way. And so definitely what they need, and I'm sure this is something you guys are all very, very good at, is just that compassion and that space. Again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir a bit here, but I also don't want to skip over that part. Like, people who are coming in are oftentimes in shock. They're not thinking. Like, they literally are not thinking, and they certainly don't know what to do at all. And so, that first responder thing of like, hi, have you eaten this morning? Would you like a snack? Can I get you something to drink? Have you had water today? I tell our families in the aftermath, oftentimes I'm like, you really just have to eat enough that you can function, and sleep enough that you aren't hallucinating, and shower enough so that you don't smell, because that's frowned upon. But beyond that, they don't have to do a lot. And so some of that is what we can offer to them, making sure that they're hydrated, making sure that they feel comfortable in this space with you. And then in time, when the crisis is over, usually after the funeral, we'll get into the now what of grief. But that beginning piece, that first responder piece, that minute they walk into your space and they're in your presence, that's when I'm really encouraging you to kind of see yourself as that crisis response, and just like, what basic needs can I meet for you right now in this moment? Because I venture to guess that no one else has done that for them. Okay, so we've gotten them water. We got them a little muffin or something, a little sugar in their system. And so, again, now what? Some of these are broad. Some of these you guys probably do naturally, but our language is going to matter even more with these stigmatized losses than it does with our other families. And so we want to make sure that we are using died by language. So, in the grief world, we don't say committed suicide. We committed is very often something that it has a negative connotation. You commit a crime, you commit adultery, you commit fraud. And so we say died by, they died by suicide. If ever you guys would like a conversation about how I understand suicide deaths and how I explain it to families, I would be happy to do that with you. We use person first language. So I understand that your son, Matthew, had autism or was diagnosed bipolar when this happened, or whatever. But Matthew comes first, son comes first before the diagnoses, before anything else. We use preferred names very much in those moments. Oh, he didn't go by Matthew. Everybody called him Maddie. Absolutely. Let's talk about Maddie. Again, I feel like you guys probably do this already. So just little reminders. That next one, though, acknowledge the extra challenges. So I'm going to encourage you to call out the stigma, to just lay it right out there. I understand that your daughter had an altercation with the police, and there was gun violence. I understand that lots of this has been in the media and social media, and how are you handling that? People know. Again, think about that internalized stigma. Like, they know. And so we don't have to pretend that we don't. In fact, for them who are, again, having trouble thinking, who are still in shock, they're going to look to you for guidance on this. And if you bring it up, we're already going to bring some of that shame down, right? Because we're going to bring it up in a really compassionate and caring way. And so the two things that get in people's way with stigmatized loss and make it much harder for them to function, and this is what the research shows, is shame and avoidant behaviors. And so what we're going to do is we're going to acknowledge how hard this is without adding any extra shame. And we're not going to avoid the conversation for them. We're just going to have the conversation, but in a kind and caring way. And it would be okay to tell them, like, hey, it's all right if you feel shame, or if you feel guilt, or whatever it is that you're feeling. Like, know that that's normal. I think something that I bring in when I first meet with a family, particularly before they've had an opportunity to meet anyone else with a similar loss. One of the things that I say to them is I've walked this path with literally thousands of people. I don't know what this is like for you, but I know for others in this situation, the social media presence has been really tough for them to manage. How is it going for you? right? I talk about like, yeah, like having somebody die of a drug overdose, it has all those extra layers. Like, is that coming up for you? Those kinds of things. Like, I just like to like put it out here. I don't pontificate. I don't lecture. I don't even sit on it very long. I just want to acknowledge it. I want to take that elephant and get it right out of the room. And then I want to follow the family's lead. How would you like us to respond? What is it that you would like us to say? Lots of times people don't know. And so they're going to look at us for ideas and suggestions for how to manage the press and how to manage social media, potentially how to manage protesters, things along those lines. So these are things we really need to be thinking about, and also preparing our families. Again, I don't like surprises. I don't like that. So another thing just to put in there for you guys is encourage the families to be honest with any children or teenagers. We as a society have this misguided idea that kids are too young or they don't need to know or whatever, and our children rely on us to be honest with them. Like something really big and scary just happened, somebody they care about has died, or somebody at least in their life has died. And so they really need to know that they can trust us when things get tough, to be honest with them in an age appropriate and caring way. And again, that's probably a whole nother presentation, but I just want to encourage that honesty. We have information overload in our society, and we really can't hide these things from our children. So let's do this together. I have predict everything and be predictable. Again, you guys have already heard me say that and practice that with you. So predict that they might feel more isolated because of the stigmatized loss. Predict that they might want to isolate because of the stigmatized loss. They also might want to isolate because of their grief. Some of that is natural and normal. Don't want to tell people what to do, but also want to encourage them to not isolate, want to encourage them to identify who in their social circle would be a good support for them. And so those are things that we can do, is predict, and be predictable. And then, giving them permission to let go of should. Particularly cultural shoulds around grief norms, around, normally we would do this, but because he died this way, I don't want to do that. Okay, you don't have to. You don't have to. In my family or in my rural community, we always do open casket. I'm just not comfortable because of the gunshot. Fine, you don't have to. You don't have to. Not everybody does. Let me tell you, not everybody does, right? So giving them permission to let go of some of those shoulds. Like, it's okay to grieve this death, even though they died in this manner. Like, this was still your person. This was still somebody that you loved. And so like giving them that permission is a really great gift. Just some reminders. So, and this one kind of combines the initial that we just talked about with like, what do I do longer term? The initial numbness that they walk in with is really protective. It's a beautiful thing. And we don't necessarily want to rip that Band-Aid off. We don't. I let people be numb. So I try and provide information. Again, I'm very crisis management oriented. What do they need right now in this moment? What seeds can I plant about not being ashamed and not isolating without overwhelming? And so a lot of times it's 3 to 6 months later that reality really starts to set in, that numbness kind of wears off, that people really sit with their grief. And so this is where it's important for us as professionals to keep in touch with them, to offer resources repeatedly, maybe even the same resources, to even allow them just to be a safe person or a safe place for them to talk it out. So how do we maintain that support? I like to say first we're practical and later we're more compassionate. Not that we're not compassionate initially and not that we're impractical later, but this is kind of how my thought works. I think about there's a widow I worked with, husband died by suicide, but he had notified someone, the first responders arrived, they called a helicopter, and so they had ambulance bills and hospital bills and helicopter arch support bills. And so this widow was almost unable to really even look at her grief because she was worried about her life insurance payment. And something she really appreciated from the funeral home was that they waited to even send a bill. And she actually reached out at one point. It had been a couple of months and she was like, hey, I haven't gotten a bill from you yet. I'm still waiting on life insurance. I'm really worried about this. And they were fantastic at being like, you're good. You're good. We will wait. So if that is something that you can do, again, like she wasn't even in her grief. It was just like this panic about the finances. And until that got figured out, she couldn't do a lot of the other stuff. So she wouldn't have been interested in finding support because first I need to get this financial piece figured out. Use your community resources. This is definitely a shameless plug. I am here as a part of the National Alliance for Children's Grief. Wonderful organization. Cannot say enough great things about them. There are lots of people there who specialize in grief. Use us as a resource for sure. There's a whole listing on there. You can find whoever is closest to you. And there's other groups as well. I'm always careful with online groups, especially with stigmatized loss, only because they're only as private as the people in the group make them. And so some of our stigmatized losses, I just worry about people's privacy. So something to keep in mind there, but not saying don't use them, just saying be mindful. Making connections with permission. So again, like I can say, I've worked with thousands of people, and here's what I know about people like you who had someone die of, die by suicide or die because they became paranoid with their schizophrenia, and the choices they made thereafter resulted in their death. Like I can tell them things like that, and I can be honest and say, like, here's typically what I see. It is a lot more powerful for them to connect with other people who have similar stories, similar losses. I think of, I have a volunteer who, a husband was a disgraced prison official, found out that he was doing things with prisoners that definitely leveraged his power, and he died of a drug overdose. And now this person leads one of our groups for stigmatized losses. And so like I'm allowed to tell that story in the hopes that other people will hear it and connect with her. So again, like sometimes we use those stories to be able to say, hey, like I have this person, she'd love to talk to you if and when you're ready. So knowing that and making sure that you can do that. That next one is really important, I think, for us as professionals in the community, which is just decreasing the stigma even when we're not working with families in particular who have a stigmatized loss. So constantly working to destigmatize and educate about grief and loss, about stigmatized deaths, about mental health issues. So one of the ways that we have done that here in our rural community is I write a daily blog about grief and loss, about trauma, about the foibles of my life, about having a small army of children and what that's like, and just really trying to normalize the experiences and normalize some of these things that we have said, like, oh, that's taboo. It's really not. It's happening to a lot of people, as we saw in those statistics. And then, if possible, offering opportunities for sharing and support within your organization is another great way for you to help families connect with others, have a safe space, and be able to share and not isolate themselves. All right. Coming into the home stretch. All right. So, final tips and takeaways. I forgot to say this on the last slide. Give yourself grace. Make sure that you are taking care of you when, and you guys know this, like you're in the same kind of similar business as I am. Some of the stuff we hear is really heavy. Some of it's really, really hard to carry. And so like know what it is that you can do to help yourself. And so, but just a final recap, tips and takeaways, just because, again, I'm a big fan of like predicting what's coming, be predictable, tell people what you just told them. I know you guys probably know this too, like people who are grieving forget everything. So I just give them permission to forget it. I say things multiple times in different ways. And then when they call and ask me, I say it all over again. Okay, so here's what we've gone over. So that first one where I say give yourself grace, remember that arm crossing activity. I just had to think about it again, right? Like it's okay if it feels wrong or weird. We can't be prepared for everything. We like things are going to be new and or people are going to be respond differently than we anticipate, and that's okay. It is absolutely all right. Use those resources that we just talked about. You guys are a large organization. It sounds like you have great support within the organization. Use each other as resources as well. We're going to meet those basic needs first. We're grief first responders. We're going to meet those basic needs. We're going to be compassionate. We're going to predict what's coming. We're going to use language that is trauma informed, grief informed. We're definitely going to acknowledge that stigma right away and see what they need. And we're going to be very culturally aware. If and when they need more, when that numbness wears off, when you know they are isolating, we reach out, we don't get a response, or we get a response that makes us think like, ooh, that sounds a little bit like isolation. Like, let's do that little bit more. Let's do that a little bit more. We're definitely going to just accept them where they are, though. Grief looks different for everyone. Stigmatized loss certainly makes it a little bit harder. But we want to make sure that they feel supported. So let's reach out after, and let's reach out multiple times. And you guys might already have this built into your care. What I would suggest for people with stigmatized losses is that maybe take it up a notch and make it a little more personal. Make it a phone call rather than a piece of mail or a text message or an email that can be ignored. Like really and truly, and I will tell you, like, and you guys probably know this too, you know, people after my husband died would be like, people I don't know would be like, oh, how are you? And I just had a set response for the masses of like, oh, no, I almost sneezed. Okay. I had a set response for the masses that was basically like, oh, we're surviving, because I really didn't want to have that conversation. And so occasionally someone would get kind of quiet and they'd go, yeah, but how are you really? And I could tell that they meant it. And it was that acceptance of like, oh, like this isn't just the pat question. Or there's a difference between that and like the nosy folks who just want something to gossip about or talk about. And so that acceptance and that meeting them where they are is really important. And then making those connections to community resources, to people with similar stories, you know, helping to create a community without stigma, like destigmatizing in everything that we do, educating people about just how many people are dying from these socially unacceptable deaths is really important. It's really, really important. And so that's what I leave you with. I would love to answer questions. I believe we have time. And so, Kelly, do you have questions for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have plenty of time to answer questions. So I would encourage anyone that does have questions to type them in the question box, and we will pause a minute just to see what we get.
Okay. Not sure if it means that I did a really good job, that I don't have like questions right off the bat, or if it means that everybody is still trying to figure out how to recross their arms.
No, I think it was absolutely wonderful. And this is actually a topic that we have explored over the last several years through the New York State Tribute Foundation. Knowing, we just want to help our funeral directors better help their families.
Absolutely.
Okay, we do have a question. Have you had experience with individuals that have lost a transgender family member? If so, how do you handle that? And how can we support both the family and respect the deceased gender?
Well, I guess it depends on if the family was accepting of the transgender person or not, right? Because, and like, was the whole family accepting? So, like, in my experience, some might be and some might not. And so it's figuring out, like, how do I do that? I always, again, use preferred names, preferred pronouns, if at all possible. I mean, some of it is like, if this is your client and the client is, say, a parent who did not accept their transgender child and they insist on, using their government name, their birth name, and gender, like, I feel like you kind of have to. If the transgender person set up the funeral themselves and paid for it themselves and said, here's what I want, then I think that's what we go with. Sometimes it's having two funerals for the same person, or memorial masses or celebrations of life, or whatever that looks like. It's always sticky. My experience with people who've lost someone who's transgender is that there are normally people who loved and accepted them the way they lived their life, and there are people who, for whatever reason, did not. And it's finding that balance within, but I do think part of that conversation has to be like, who's your client? Because I do think you have to honor that, like, that's who's paying you. Unfortunately, sometimes that makes it really muddy. But I often follow the client's lead. I don't, I was gonna say, because it's not like we get to decide that, right? Like, we're not deciding anything for people. We're simply guiding and supporting and suggesting. If that didn't answer it,
Okay,
put
and
something else in the chat.
yeah. The next question is, do you have any tips on how to coach and support families in regards to the media, such as with news reporters or television coverage?
So that's always tricky. I am a huge fan of everybody says the exact same thing over and over again, as succinctly as possible. And I make sure that everyone knows what that is. And that's not even just like media, news reporters. That's also like, if kids are involved, it's what the school is saying. If there's a corporation work involved, it's what the work is saying. Like, really kind of figuring out what people are comfortable saying, and then making sure that all of the key players that the media might reach out to have that and are aware that this is what the family has requested be said, and nothing else beyond that. When we're talking about some of these really high profile deaths, any little deviation sometimes can be overexplored and exploited, and it's the last thing that our families need. So I like very just brief, direct. I'm a huge fan of, we ask for privacy at this time because it lets the world know, like, we're not on board with this conversation. And I mean, the media is going to do what the media is going to do. Society is going to do what it does. But if you don't give it any oxygen, it's really hard for it to go somewhere. Is kind of the approach that I take.
Great, thank you. Do you have any recommendations for books or other resources that can be helpful for funeral directors in this area?
Oh my goodness. That's like a whole presentation all on its own. Kelly, can I come back and do, here are the books that we should all be reading. I'm trying to think of like, I know and it's older, for my folks who, for working with folks who grapple with their faith, I really like The Shack, which talks about, it's a very, it's a little older. It's a very raw book. It's about a father whose daughter was murdered, and the father is grappling with his faith, and just like how can his religion, how is he supposed to forgive this person who did all these terrible things to his daughter? So I find that one to be really just good for helping us get some insight into what that might look like, and some really great thoughts on how to answer some questions, right? I'm trying to think of other books off the top of my head that I tell you what, my contact info is there. Reach out to me, and then I don't have to do this on the spot. I also know, like, NAGC has resources up on their webpage. The Dougie Center out in Oregon also has some great references. I believe Aluna might have some really good books out there. That's just a tough one, because every one of them is going to be like specific to a certain stigmatized loss. I don't have one that I can think of off the top of my head that is like the book that you read. And stigmatized losses, they shift and they morph. What once wasn't. If you'd have told me 10 years ago we were going to have a pandemic and the cause of death was going to become stigmatized, I would have been like, this makes zero sense to me whatsoever. And yet here we are. And so, yeah, I mean, really great question. Reach out to me, and I'll put it together for you much more cohesively than I am in this answer.
Great. And it looks like we have one final question. Can you talk about the current trend towards less traditional funerals and how this might affect the support of families experiencing a stigmatized death?
Sure. I think some of it is, as we know better, we do better. And so traditional funerals for some people are really comforting and feel really good, and for other people they don't, or they had a not great experience as a child, whatnot. I think as we as a society become less traditional in and of itself, we're going to see more people doing things that are outside the box. I think you're seeing that in other ways too. If you think about weddings becoming more commitment ceremonies and people doing those in different ways and getting away from some of the traditions there. Again, by and large, most people still do funerals. By and large, most people still do traditional weddings. However, there's this trend of like, oh, let's do it over here. Let's do it this way. What I would love to see is us to find back some of the traditions that allow public mourning and socially acceptable mourning to last a lot longer. I find myself not nostalgic, but nostalgic for the year of mourning that used to occur, that, where people had this expectation and they wore Black clothing, and, people expected them to be sad. Now, I don't like that at 1 year it was over and now go live your life, because we know that grief lasts much longer than that. But I really like that. Some of the non-traditional things actually allow us to provide services that are more child forward for some of ours that are like kids who've had a loss. So I like that too. But I don't know that we're ever fully going to get away from funerals. And I think if you can personalize more, you're going to have more people coming to you. And that to me is just, we've become very, very service oriented as a society. People in general want to personalize everything. And as they learn more about how you can do that, they're going to bring that to us. You know, it's like me in therapy when the kids come in and they've already diagnosed themselves because they saw this TikTok or they took this, assessment on Instagram, and they're telling me that, they're schizophrenic, and I'm looking at them like, you're not schizophrenic, but what do I know? It's some of that, right? Like helping to educate them about like, no, that's not how that works. This is really kind of where I see you, and this is the therapy that I think might be most helpful. Tell me about how that fits with what you want. I think the funeral service can do a lot of the same, like people coming in and saying, oh, I don't want a funeral, I want a celebration of life. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's what we want to do. And you being like, okay, like I hear you. However, there's also this piece that lots of people find really important, that visitation piece or Shiva or, whatever, being allowed to also have that piece, reminding people that these traditions exist because they serve a purpose, and seeing if you can't meet them in the middle, or at least just help them develop something that also will fit that need as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Fulkerson. We appreciate you being on. This is a fabulous webinar, and we hope that maybe we can connect with you in the future for a secondary one.
That would be awesome.
And Dr. Fulkerson's information is on the screen right now. If you have any questions for her, please feel free to reach out or reach out to us and we can connect you. I just, again, want to thank you because it was fabulous. For everyone else, like I said in the beginning, please allow us 7 to 10 business days in order to get your portal reflective of your credit. We oftentimes do it sooner, but we ask for the extended time. And if we ask you for your number in the beginning, you heard that number. Your number at the end is 12. Just in case we ask you for the number from the beginning of the webinar and the end, you have them both now. I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.